I want to show you guys here a clip of Matt Stoller. If you don't know Matt Stoller, he covers monopoly issues, antitrust issues, that kind of thing. And he did a clip for Breaking Points. He does a weekly collaboration with Breaking Points. I've also put in the description box. He's talking about a comment box that you can put into the government about monopoly and antitrust. He's going to go into that in this clip. Just want to tell the audience ahead of time. I linked that in the description box. You can scroll down there and find the link to leave your comment if you're interested in letting the federal government know what you think about monopoly power. And I also linked Matt's Substack below if you're interested in following his work. So this again is Matt Stoller on Breaking Points talking about antitrust enforcement.
Stoller, and this is another big breakdown. So what is the problem exactly with our economy, with our society? Well, there are many. Wages don't rise with profits. People are afraid of their boss. Medicine costs way too much and is full of really annoying and harmful bureaucracy. Corporations like Boeing can't even do the things that they are supposed to do, like build airplanes that don't crash. There's even mass censorship, which often we don't see. So, for instance, Sagar and Crystal have pointed out that YouTube sometimes downgrades Breaking Points videos, depending on the content. This is true for other firms like TikTok as well. Now, there's a thread connecting all or most of these problems: monopoly power. And monopoly power is undergirded by a specific technique used by Wall Street: mergers. Corporate mergers create monopolies. Now, over the last 40 years, waves of these corporate mergers have consolidated economic power into the hands of a small group of people that basically control all the money in the world and put you and me into automated phone trees whenever we need to get a hold of someone to help us. So let's talk about mergers. What is a merger? A corporate merger is what happens when two corporations combine into one corporation. Here's a clip from a slick video that was made by one of these corporations.
A merger occurs when two companies combine to create one organization. For example, Exxon and Mobil merged in 1999 to form a new company, ExxonMobil.
That's your friendly neighborhood giant multinational oil company recreating Standard Oil of the early 1900s. Now, there are some good reasons that corporations merge. Like, let's say you have an owner who wants to retire and sell his pool maintenance business or small software firm, or if a company's about to go bankrupt and needs a lifeline. It's really not a problem when this happens, when small firms merge. But when bigger ones buy one another, like when Exxon buys Mobil, it's very different. When big firms combine, the goal is often to corner a market and raise prices, or lower wages, or often both. Big firms that combine, when they merge, raise prices on average by 7%. And anyone who has tried to rent a car knows this, since Hertz and Dollar Thrifty merged in 2012 and immediately jacked up what it costs to rent a car. So higher prices, that's not all. Big corporations that merge usually lay people off. They reduce wages. They do more lobbying to corrupt politicians. And they pay their CEOs a lot of money. Now, you might remember that AT&T and Time Warner merger a few years ago. It was sort of a disaster for the two companies. There were big layoffs. AT&T, Time Warner, it's now splitting up. They fired a bunch of people and destroyed a lot of shareholder wealth. But the merger worked out for Time Warner CEO Jeff Bezos, who made $400 million with his golden parachute payoff when he sold Time Warner to AT&T. So that's an unsuccessful merger, and many mergers are unsuccessful, and they're a waste of time. They cause a lot of problems. But mergers that succeed are almost worse, because mergers, when they succeed, of big companies, more importantly than screwing things up, they create monopolies. They consolidate economic power. So for instance, Google, which is the company that sometimes censors this channel, has bought hundreds of firms since 2002, including, yes, YouTube. Facebook is another one that controls how we can communicate and think, bought Instagram and WhatsApp. Amazon, control over books, but also online commerce, has made hundreds of acquisitions to expand its business and wipe out potential competitors. It's not just big tech. The music events producer, just to pick one at random, Live Nation bought Ticketmaster over 10 years ago. And that's one reason ticket fees have been going up and up and up. And musicians and event producers routinely get bullied. There were 24 major airlines in 1980. Because of mergers, and there's some mergers listed on this chart, today there are basically 4 major airlines. The result is flight cancellations. There was a bunch of flight cancellations this weekend or last weekend on Southwest, but there have been hundreds of thousands over the course of the last few years. Ticket fees that we all love, poor service for those flying from big cities, and more importantly, the end of access to flights to and from most smaller and many mid-sized cities. A big chunk of the country just can't get access to the air grid anymore. Now, behind so many problems in our economy and in our society, you can find a merger or 2 or 5. Take the 737 MAX. Yep, that is a result of Boeing merging with McDonnell Douglas. Drug and medical supply shortages? Yep, that's a result of mergers in an obscure space called group purchasing organizations. High ammunition prices? Yep, that's because a corporate raider bought and ruined Remington about 10 years ago. There are a lot of details in my newsletter on all of these case studies if you want to know more. I don't want to get too much into details on any particular one because that will get in the way of what I'm really trying to convey today. But you can look all of these up. They're really interesting. And the overall point here is that there are mergers that have consolidated everything from cheerleading to mail sorting software to prison phone services, pretty much every nook and cranny of our society. So for instance, in 2019, 2 large Nevada gold mines merged, and the merged entity ended up controlling 75% of Nevada gold production. And so what did this new firm do? Immediately it broke the union and reduced compensation because workers no longer had a choice of where to work. Okay, so mergers between big firms are almost always bad. So why do we allow them? And as it turns out, we didn't used to. And there's still a law against most of these big bad mergers. And it's called the Clayton Act. It was passed in 1914. It is, however, a law that for the last 40 years has largely gone unenforced. Why? There aren't that many actual conspiracies in politics, but this is a real one. In 1980, the incoming Reagan administration hatched a plot. They were trying to figure out how to get rid of antitrust law, how to release unfettered big business on the land. But they realized that repealing the law outright would be unpopular. So here's what they did instead. This is a memo that a researcher at my organization found in the Reagan Library. It's titled, "Throttling Back on Antitrust, a Practical Proposal for Deregulation." Now in it, George Stigler and Richard Posner, who were two famous antitrust thinkers, unveiled a plan to get rid of the Clayton Act without having to go to Congress. And remember, the Clayton Act is the law against these big bad mergers that have ruined a lot of the American economy. Now, the honest way to repeal a law is to make your case publicly, to go to Congress and get them to vote to repeal a law. And the Reagan administration, to be fair, did try that with the Clayton Act in 1986. But Congress refused to go along because people don't like big bad mergers. So instead, the Reagan administration effectively repealed the Clayton Act secretly. And here's how. There are instructions to courts and enforcers how the antitrust division thinks merger law should work. These are called merger guidelines. And judges basically trust enforcers and have trusted enforcers to tell them how to think about mergers and the Clayton Act. The law is a little bit vague, so these guidelines kind of fill in some of the blanks. The Reagan administration antitrusters took advantage of this, and they quietly rewrote merger laws. That's what that memo is about. Now, getting rid of the law without repealing it, but just not enforcing it, was an intentional strategy. Reagan's key antitrust enforcer was a guy named Bill Baxter. That's this guy. Baxter followed the secret plan and simply refused to enforce laws he didn't like. This included a bunch of the antitrust laws. He called, for instance, Supreme Court decisions that mandated strong antitrust rules, quote unquote, rubbish and wacko and idiocy. It's what he called one precedent. He just refused to follow the law. Now, the plan that Stigler and Posner outlined and that Baxter carried through worked. The antitrust laws basically went away without being repealed. Now, here's a chart. The formatting of this chart is very old-timey because it's an old chart from the 1980s, and it's on just what happened with corporate acquisitions after the new guidelines in 1982 kicked in. Now, on Wall Street in the 1980s, and then every decade since, it's been all about mergers and acquisitions, in which deal makers make millions selling companies to one another, and corporate raiders, who are now called private equity, make billions, often by buying companies, monopolizing markets, and laying off workers. Now, the culture on Wall Street and beyond basically became, in the 1980s, greed is good. In fact, one could argue that that was the motto of the 1980s. It was in a famous Oliver Stone 1987 movie called Wall Street. The thing is, greed is always with us. It's not like greed is new. What has changed wasn't human nature. We didn't become greedier. What changed was the law, and specifically the merger guidelines. Now, this legal change was so important that it literally rebuilt corporate America. Over the next 40 years, nearly every major firm was either acquired or it became an acquirer. And Bill Clinton, who is arguably the worst man alive, maybe in competition with Henry Kissinger for that title, actually made the problem worse. So did George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump. And thus, Boeing 737 MAX, Ticketmaster, airline fees, lower wages, and so on and so forth. But here's the thing, and this is where there's sort of some good news. The era of greed is good is ending. Both parties, increasingly, and the American people writ large, have had it. That's the good news. So let me introduce you to a new law enforcer named Lina Khan. Khan is the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, which is the agency that is supposed to police fairness in our markets, including some parts of the Clayton Act. She's the youngest chair in history, and she is something of an ass kicker. Both Google and Amazon lobbied heavily against her nomination. They lost. She's a regular topic of conversation on CNBC, which is the news channel of Capital, because Khan wants to revive how we do antitrust, how the government, how our democracy relates to big business. So let's take a listen about how she thinks about big business and the law.
Historically, been various moments in which there's been a recognition across jurisdictions that if you allow unfettered monopoly power to concentrate, its power can rival that of the state, right? And historically, the antitrust laws have a rich tradition and rich history, and a key goal was to ensure that our commercial sphere was characterized by the same types of checks and balances and protections against concentration of economic power that we had set up in our political and governance sphere. And so the desire to kind of check those types of concentrations of power, I think, is deep in the American tradition.
So that's Lina Khan talking about how she thinks, that's her philosophy. And it's an old philosophy, but not a greed is good philosophy. Now, powerful firms like Google and Amazon also lobbied to prevent the other main antitrust enforcer in the Biden administration from being nominated. And his name is Jonathan Kanter. Less famous than Khan, he runs the Department of Justice Antitrust Division. But don't be fooled. Kanter is a longtime antitrust lawyer, but he is also bringing an aggressive new philosophy into the division. He has actually called for bringing back handcuffs, aka criminal charges, for executives who illegally monopolize. And that raised a lot of eyebrows. Now, Lina Khan and Jonathan Kanter are Democrats. They were picked by the Biden administration. But the right is also very angry about corporate power as well. Here's Laura Ingraham last week on Fox News talking about the social power and economic power of Disney and Apple.
The antitrust division at Justice needs to begin the process of considering which American companies need to be broken up once and for all, for competition's sake, and ultimately for the good of the consumers who pay the bills.
So you've got Khan and you've got Cantor, and they're Democrats, but they actually had around 67, 68 votes in the Senate, so a lot of Republicans voted for them. And then you have regular anti-monopoly arguments on Fox News. Now, of course, there are deep divides about social questions underpinning anti-monopolism on both sides. But both sides are increasingly realizing that dominant firms shouldn't be making key decisions over how society works, even if they disagree with each other about what they want those decisions to be. Now, Khan and Cantor have decided to take a playbook from Reagan and are rewriting the merger guidelines, but this time they're doing it in reverse. They want to enforce the law, not quietly repeal it. And here's where you come in. They want your help. Khan and Cantor have opened up a process for the government to solicit comments from the public on mergers. Essentially, they want you to email the government and say what you think. The reason this matters, the reason your comments matter, is because the new guidelines will be attacked in the courts. And judges are going to want to make sure that these merger guidelines are based on real input. And I've looked into the docket where there are a bunch of comments. There are a lot of nerdy and annoying economists and corrupt lobbyists who are organized, who are paid by dominant firms, and they have submitted their views saying, everything is going great, we don't need any changes. Khan and Cantor need to hear from ordinary people, like you and me. Here's Cantor a couple of months ago talking about the need for such feedback.
The views of consumers, workers, innovators, farmers, and others on the ground feeling the harms of market concentration present an incredibly valuable perspective for our efforts. And so here's our message to the entire American people. Please share your views. We need your input, and we absolutely care what you think.
You haven't seen any of this on the media, but this is what's actually going in the government. All the money and power in the world is being debated right now by these people with economists and lobbyists submitting comments in an obscure docket. And this is how politics actually changes. And I want to invite you in. So help out Khan and Cantor. If you have thoughts on mergers, if you've been through a merger, or if you've bought products from a company that merged, or if you just want to say no more power to big business, go ahead and do that. How? Well, I've put a link in the video description that you can use. The deadline is April 21st, and that's in about a week and a half. You can submit anonymously as well. So if you're worried about retaliation, just do it without your name attached. So use that link. There are instructions on how to do it. You can read as much as you want about it, but go ahead and get in there so that we can get a counterforce against the lobbyists. Now, a bunch of people have actually already submitted comments, from doctors to video gamers to pharmaceutical producers. The doctors' ones are amazing, talking about private equity coming in and reducing wages and causing them to harm their patients. Really amazing. The video gamers are concerned about Microsoft Activision. But, come in, chime in on whatever you're concerned about. Now, on one of the links below, you can also look at the docket like I have and read the comments that other people have put in there. Now, what Khan and Cantor are asking for, what I'm asking you to do, may not seem like a big deal. You might think that your voice just doesn't matter. But here's the thing, in this case, it does. There are a bunch of comments, but only 300 right now in the docket. So that's not very many. And having one more or two more does actually matter. Your voice really can make a difference. It's a really bad time right now. It feels very divided. The media is constantly talking about doom, doom, doom. But if you look at antitrust, corporate power questions, we really are making progress. And it's not covered by the media. These kinds of obscure procedural issues that involve all the money and power in the world, you don't see them on Fox News or MSNBC. You see them on Breaking Points, but not in the mainstream media. But we are making progress. 2.5 years ago, antitrust was just kind of an interesting idea. But today, there are 5 different government antitrust suits just against Google. and many more that are going to be filed against a lot of dominant firms. So I'm asking you to submit a comment because it will have an impact. Let's reverse what our leaders have done to this country and free ourselves from the monopolies ruining our society. Thanks for watching this big breakdown on the Breaking Points channel. If you'd like to know more about big business and how our economy really works, you could sign up below for my market power focused newsletter, Big.
So first of all, I just can't gloss over the little comment he made in the middle there about Bill Clinton might be the worst person in the world or Henry Kissinger's in the running there, right? I thought that was fucking hilarious. That's absolutely hilarious. Yeah, Bill Clinton, by the way, one of the reasons that's quite true. I mean, maybe not literally, but he's a very bad dude, is because he basically ensured that the Reaganistic view of economics became universal. He's the one that more than anybody else pulled the Democrats into the neoliberal sphere. So he kind of eliminated any institutional competition or opposition to Reagan's neoliberal trickle-down nonsense. And I just love that little quip from Matt there right in the middle of his report. He might be the worst person in the world, or maybe Henry Kissinger. That's hilarious. If you're cynical like me, borderline cynical, however you want to phrase it, you may kind of scoff at the end point where he's saying, please go leave a comment, okay? I just want to make a case really quick to encourage you all to leave a quick comment, even if it's just as quick as, Monopoly bad, please fix. I don't care. The reason that it actually matters in this case, if you have a story to tell, please tell it. The reason it actually matters in this case is because it's about legal proceedings. So this isn't like a leave a comment to convince your representative to do the right thing kind of an issue. This is leave a comment because we need stories to present to the judges to go forward with this proceeding. Okay. So it is a little bit different than just like asking a powerful person to do the right thing. I know that can feel entirely futile and like a waste of your time. This is a little bit different than that. So again, I put that link in the description box there if any of you are interested in leaving a comment for the antitrust lawyers who are trying to push forward with this. And huge shout out to Matt. I also linked his Substack Big in the description box there. He does really great work, you guys, detailing how these monopolies form and develop and how they maintain their power and how they affect everyday people. So just wonderful stuff from Matt. Encourage you all to follow his work as well. And object to monopolies, you guys. This is really, really, really simple. It's never good for workers or consumers. It's never good for everyday people when you have a large portion of a market consolidated to one or a few companies. It's never good. It's just all bad.